The scream in the orchard. The sun was just beginning to set behind the hills, casting golden light across the small countryside town. Keanu Reeves was passing through on his way to a quiet retreat he had planned for months. He had driven himself, wanting to stay off the grid, away from paparazzi and just breathe. The fresh air, the long stretches of road, and the sound of tires rolling over gravel were exactly what he needed. He stopped at a small roadside farm stand to buy some fresh fruit. It was peaceful, no one recognized him, and the farmer, an old man with a soft voice, simply offered apples and peaches without even a second glance. Keanu thanked him with a warm smile and turned back toward his car. Then he heard it. A scream, sharp, terrified, and trembling. It came from the orchard behind the stand. Keanu froze. Instinct took over. He dropped his bag and ran toward the sound without thinking. His boots crunched through the dry leaves and soft dirt until he saw her. An old woman, maybe in her 80s, had fallen near a wooden fence. She was waving her arms, panicked. Swarming around her were bees. Dozens, maybe more. She must have stumbled into a hive. Without hesitation, Keanu pulled off his jacket and rushed toward her. He didn't care about the risk. The woman's white hair was tangled, her hands bleeding from scratches, and her voice was barely audible now. Weak, broken. He wrapped her tightly in the jacket, shielding her face and body as best as he could. The bees stung his arms, his neck, even his face. But he held her close and carried her away from the swarm, pushing through the orchard until they were far from the hive. They collapsed together near the gravel road. Her breathing was shallow. Keanu reached for his phone and called for help. Ambulance, fire department, anything. His voice was calm, controlled, but his hands shook. The woman gripped his sleeve, whispering something too faint to understand. Sirens arrived 10 minutes later. Paramedics moved fast. They praised Keanu for what he did, saying the woman wouldn't have survived another minute in that swarm. She had an allergic reaction. Without the adrenaline shot and oxygen, she would have died. Keanu didn't say much. He just sat on the side of the road, bee stings covering his arms like tiny red blisters. His eyes followed the ambulance as it disappeared down the hill. Someone brought him a bottle of water. He nodded in thanks. That night, he checked into a small inn nearby. The manager recognized him but said nothing. Maybe she saw how tired he was. Maybe she understood that fame didn't mean anything when your arms were covered in stings and your heart was still racing from a scream. In the quiet of his room, Keanu looked out the window. The moon was rising over the orchard. He kept thinking about her face, the fear, the helplessness, and the way her hand trembled when she touched his sleeve. He had saved her. But something about her eyes stayed in his mind. The next morning, he called the hospital. He asked about her. The nurse was surprised. No reporters had called. No family had shown up, just him. "She's awake now," the nurse said. "Her name's Eliza. She asked about you." Keanu paused. "Can I visit?" There was a pause. "I think she'd like that." He went straight there. No cameras, no press, just a cap, sunglasses, and a quiet step. Eliza was sitting up in bed, her arm bruised, lips dry but eyes sharp. When she saw him, she smiled. "You're the one," she whispered. "I know who you are." Keanu sat down beside her. "You scared me?" She laughed softly. "I scare myself sometimes." There was a long silence, then she said, "You saved my life. But I think maybe there's a reason." Keanu tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Her eyes watered and she looked down at her hands. "I've been waiting a long time to tell someone something important. I thought I'd die with it. But you were there at the right time." He didn't speak. He just listened. "I have something to give you," she whispered. And just like that, a mystery was born. One that would change Keanu's life forever. The letter in the drawer. Keanu returned the next morning with flowers, not knowing what to expect. The hospital room was quiet. Eliza was awake, her head turned toward the window as soft sunlight touched her pale skin. When he stepped inside, her eyes lit up. "You came back," she whispered. Keanu smiled and handed her the flowers. "I told you I would." She looked down at them, touching each petal gently. "You remind me of someone," she said after a while. "He used to bring me flowers, too." Keanu sat beside her again. "Who was he?" "My husband," she said, voice fragile. "Arthur. He died many years ago. But there was something in your face yesterday. A calmness. The way you moved. He had that too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Eliza turned toward her nightstand and tapped a drawer. "There's a key," she said. "Inside my purse, take it." Keanu hesitated. "A key?" "Yes," she said. "To my cottage. Go there. I want you to find something." Keanu looked into her eyes. They were serious, clear. There was no confusion in her voice. "It's in the drawer of the old writing desk, the one by the fireplace. You want me to go now?" She nodded. "Before it's too late. Before someone else does." He didn't ask questions. He had learned over the years to trust strange turns in life. Sometimes a stranger's request was more honest than a friend's silence. So he took the key, found the address scribbled on a worn piece of paper, and drove out of town. The cottage was small, hidden behind an overgrown garden. Vines climbed the stone walls and the wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. The air smelled like dust and lavender. Inside, everything felt frozen in time. Framed pictures on the walls, knitted blankets folded neatly, an old radio on the windowsill. It wasn't a place abandoned. It was a place paused. He found the desk easily. The drawer was locked. The key slid in with a click. Inside was a thick envelope, yellowed with age, tied with a red ribbon. Keanu opened it slowly. A letter. Handwritten. Shaky but legible. "To the one who finds this, my name is Eliza Rutherford. If you're reading this, then I'm either very brave or very foolish, because this letter contains the truth about something I've carried for over 50 years. I once made a decision that changed not just my life, but another's as well. A boy. A child. I never saw again. His name was Daniel. He was not my son, but I raised him for 2 years after his parents died in an accident near our farm. They were travelers, lost, and no one came looking. The authorities wanted to put him in the system. I couldn't let that happen. So I kept him hidden, safe, loved, until one night and he was taken. I've never forgiven myself for letting him go, but I've spent my life looking. And if you, kind stranger, are reading this, please, help me find out what happened to him. I've saved everything I could, photos, notes, clues. They're in the chest in the attic. Please. For Daniel. For the truth." Eliza. Keanu sat back in the chair, stunned. A woman attacked by bees in a field had just pulled him into a decades-old mystery. He didn't know what to say or feel. But his heart beat faster. He couldn't walk away. He climbed to the attic. It was cramped and dusty. But in the corner was a wooden chest. Inside he found more letters, old photos of a boy with curly black hair, and a stack of newspaper clippings tied with twine. He sat on the floor, slowly reading through them. The more he saw, the more invested he became. A note written in a child's scrawl read, "I love you, Mama Eliza." He felt tears sting his eyes. There was a photograph tucked deep beneath the papers. Keanu picked it up and froze. The boy. Daniel. He looked familiar. Too familiar. His heart pounded as he turned the photo over. Daniel Avery, age 4, 1972. Keanu stared at the name. Avery. He had worked with a director named Avery once, a quiet, thoughtful man. He had told Keanu once, "I never knew my real parents. Just remember a woman who smelled like lavender." Keanu's hands trembled. Was it the same person? Was Daniel still alive? And if so, why had no one told Eliza? He knew what he had to do. The name that echoed Keanu didn't sleep that night. He sat in the small living room of Eliza's cottage. Papers spread all around him. Photographs, letters, receipts, and notes. Each one led deeper into the story of Daniel Avery. And one name, kept echoing in his mind. Avery. Keanu had worked with a man named Thomas Avery nearly 10 years ago on a film in New York. He remembered him clearly. Quiet, intense, sharp. They had spoken in passing during lunch breaks. Once, Thomas had mentioned he was adopted. He'd laughed, a little bitterly, and said, "I've got no memory of anything before I was 5. Just flashes of someone humming lullabies. And lavender. Lavender." Keanu leaned forward, heart racing. He picked up the photo of the little boy again. Black curls, curious eyes, the way he hugged the edge of the blanket in the picture, just like Thomas used to fidget with his sleeves when he was nervous on set. Was it possible? He needed answers, and he knew the only person who could give them was Thomas himself. Keanu left the cottage at sunrise, driving straight to Los Angeles. He didn't call ahead, didn't text, didn't want to cause panic or bring attention. This was personal. He arrived at the studio lot where Thomas worked now as a producer. The guards recognized Keanu and let him through without delay. Inside, the office buzzed with assistants, interns, and quiet conversations. But Keanu's presence shifted the atmosphere. Someone went to fetch Thomas. When he came out of his glass office, his eyes lit up. "Keanu?" he said, surprised. "What brings you here?" Keanu didn't waste time. "Can we talk?" he asked. Thomas nodded, waving everyone away. They stepped into a quiet conference room. Once alone, Keanu pulled out the photo of the boy. He handed it over. Thomas stared at it for a long time. "Do you know who this is?" Keanu asked gently. Thomas ran his fingers across the image. "No, I don't think so. But it feels familiar." Keanu leaned forward. "Her name is Eliza Rutherford. She says she raised a boy named Daniel Avery after a car accident killed his parents in the early 70s. She kept him hidden from the system, out of fear. But one night he was taken. She's been looking ever since." Thomas looked up, expression tight. "I was adopted when I was around 4 or 5. I don't remember much. Just flashes. A warm kitchen, someone singing, and always that smell. Lavender. She was attacked by bees," Keanu said softly. "I saved her by chance, but maybe it wasn't chance, maybe you're meant to know." Thomas went still. The room felt heavy. "I've never wanted to know before," Thomas said. "I always told myself it didn't matter. But there were nights I would lie awake wondering if someone out there missed me." Keanu pulled out a letter, one written by Eliza to Daniel. It was tucked in the chest with the others. Thomas took it. His hands trembled as he opened it. He read in silence. Halfway through, his lips began to quiver. "She called me her moonbeam," he whispered. "No one else ever called me that. Not once, I remember that. Moonbeam." Tears filled his eyes. "It's her," he said. "It's her." Keanu leaned back, overwhelmed. Then Thomas asked, Is she okay?" "She's in the hospital," Keanu replied. "Recovering. But she's old, Thomas. She's been waiting decades. If you want to see her, you shouldn't wait." Thomas nodded slowly. "Take me to her." They arrived the next morning. Keanu drove. Thomas was silent most of the way, holding the letter close to his chest. The town was still and quiet when they arrived at the hospital. Keanu led him through the hallways, past white curtains and slow footsteps, until they reached room 214. Eliza was sitting up, reading a book with her glasses slightly askew, when she looked up and saw Keanu. She smiled, but then she noticed Thomas behind him, and her breath caught in her throat. The book fell from her hands. Thomas stepped forward slowly. "Hi," he said, voice shaky. "My name is Thomas Avery, but I think, I used to be Daniel." Eliza covered her mouth. Tears ran down her face before she could speak. "Moonbeam," she whispered. That was all it took. Thomas crossed the room and gently embraced her. They held each other like time had folded in on itself. Not as strangers, not as guests in each other's lives, but as family. Keanu stepped out quietly and let them have that moment alone. Outside the room, He leaned against the wall. Heart full, eyes misty. He had only meant to stop for fruit. Instead, he had changed 2 lives forever. Echoes of the past. Keanu sat alone in the hospital garden while Eliza and Thomas reconnected inside. The sun was warm, the air still. He looked up at the sky and let himself breathe. What had started as a random stop at a fruit stand had become something far deeper than he ever expected. He thought of all the films he had done, the scripts he had read, the roles he had played, but none of them came close to what was unfolding. Now, this was real. It was life. Messy, fragile, beautiful. About an hour later, Thomas stepped outside. His eyes were red, but his face was calm, as if a lifelong question had finally been answered. "She told me everything," he said, sitting down next to Keanu. "About the accident, about hiding me, about the night those men came." Keanu looked over at him. "You believe her now?" Thomas nodded. "More than anything." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said something unexpected. "She didn't just hide me from the authorities. She protected me from men who wanted to take me for something else." Keanu turned, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" She said 2 men in suits came the night before I disappeared. They weren't from social services. They had no papers, no names. They asked strange questions about the crash, about what my parents were carrying when they died. She refused to hand me over. She said they threatened her. Then the next night, I was gone. Keanu leaned forward. "Do you think they took you?" "I don't know. Maybe. But then I ended up in foster care in a city 3 hours away. No explanation. No one knew where I came from. I was listed as found wandering." Keanu frowned. "It doesn't make sense." Thomas nodded. "Exactly. And here's the thing. My adoptive parents told me something once years ago. They said the agency said I was high priority. Why? They never knew. They thought it was about medical history or maybe something with my parents. But now, I wonder if it had something to do with what my biological parents were involved in." Keanu felt a cold chill. "Eliza kept some of their things," Thomas continued. "She showed me photos of them, letters. She said they were scientists, independent researchers." Keanu's mind began to race. "Do you still have those letters?" Thomas nodded. "I scanned them this morning." He pulled out his phone and handed it to Keanu. One letter stood out. It was addressed to a research facility in Nevada, dated 1971. "We believe our findings will reshape what people understand about memory transfer. Cellular encoding is more than theory now." Keanu looked up. "This is big." Thomas leaned back. "I think my parents were working on something powerful, and someone wanted it." Keanu stared at the trees, processing everything. "You're not just reconnecting with your past. You might be part of something larger than you realize." Thomas nodded slowly. "And now I have to find out what it is." Later that day, the 3 of them, Eliza, Thomas, and Keanu, sat together in the hospital room. Eliza was stronger now. Her voice had steadied and color had returned to her cheeks. She held Thomas's hand like she'd never let go again. "Always wondered," she said softly. "What happened to you? I thought maybe you hated me." Thomas shook his head. "I never hated you. I just didn't remember. But now that I do, everything feels like it's falling into place." Keanu sat quietly watching them. Then Thomas looked over. "You saved both our lives, Keanu. If you hadn't come that day," Keanu waved it off gently. "I was just in the right place at the right time." Eliza looked at him. "No, you were sent. I believe that." Thomas stood. "We're going to find out the truth. I want to know what happened to my parents, what they were working on, and why someone wanted me gone." Keanu nodded. "I'll help." "You've already done enough," Thomas said. Keanu smiled. "Sometimes helping isn't about doing everything. It's about standing with someone when they need strength." Eliza wiped a tear. "Arthur used to say that. Stand beside those who walk in the dark." Outside, a storm began to gather in the distance, but inside the hospital room there was light. not from the ceiling bulbs, but from hearts finally healing. Back, at the cottage that evening, Thomas and Keanu went through the rest of the papers in the attic. Some were scientific notes hard to understand. But one envelope caught Keanu's eye. It was sealed with wax, unmarked. Inside was a photo, an old image of two men in suits standing near the ruins of a car crash. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "They were never from the government." Keanu and Thomas looked at each other. Whatever had started 50 years ago wasn't finished, and someone still didn't want it to be uncovered. Secrets in the cellar. The next morning brought gray skies and a light drizzle over the small town. Keanu and Thomas stood silently outside Eliza's cottage, the envelope with the photo still clutched tightly in Keanu's hand. Inside, Eliza was resting, finally sleeping soundly after days of tears and conversation. Her heart was full, but her body was still fragile. Keanu glanced down at the photo again, the two men in dark suits standing beside a mangled car. The way they stood didn't feel like investigators. They weren't looking for survivors. They were scanning, watching, almost guarding. They weren't from the government, Thomas repeated, reading the words again on the back. Then who were they? Keanu asked. I think they were after my parents' research, Thomas said. And maybe they thought I was the key. Keanu looked toward the woods behind the cottage. Eliza said there was a place her husband never let her enter. A cellar under the barn. Maybe that's where the rest of the story is. The barn was old and leaning, paint chipped from weather and time. They had passed it many times but never thought to look closer. Now with the photo in hand and questions piling up, it felt like the final door. Keanu found the key on a hook near the back door of the cottage. Thomas followed him across the wet grass. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and damp wood. Dust swirled as their footsteps creaked across the floor. Behind a stack of broken crates, they found it. A trapdoor. Keanu pulled it open. The stairs were steep and narrow, leading into darkness. You sure about this? Thomas asked. I've come this far, Keanu said. So have you. They descended, slowly, using their phones as flashlights. The cellar was small but dry. Shelves lined the walls, and in the far corner was a heavy metal cabinet bolted to the ground. A red lock held it shut. Keanu knelt. This lock's newer than the rest of this place. Thomas crouched beside him. My parents must have used this cabinet to hide whatever they were working on. Keanu looked around. There has to be a key. They searched for 20 minutes. Finally, Keanu found a small wooden box buried beneath a pile of old farm tools. Inside was a tiny brass key. It fit. The cabinet creaked open, revealing several thick folders, a few dusty journals, and, surprisingly, a small black case no larger than a shoebox. Thomas pulled out one of the journals and flipped it open. My father's handwriting, he whispered. The entries were detailed, filled with diagrams, equations, and phrases like memory imprint, through olfactory triggers and cellular storage potential, confirmed in lab rats. Keanu pulled out the small case and opened it. Inside was a tiny vial filled with a glowing blue liquid. They stared at it. What is this? Keanu asked. Thomas shook his head. I don't know. But look, he pointed to a label on the inside of the lid. Project Echo. Subject. D.A. Keanu's voice was low. D.A. Daniel Avery. Thomas backed away slightly. They were experimenting on me. Keanu gently closed the box. Your parents may have been trying to protect you from something bigger, or they may have involved you in something they couldn't control. Suddenly a loud creak echoed from above. They froze. Footsteps. Someone was in the barn. Keanu quickly shut the cabinet and pushed a crate over it. He signaled Thomas to kill the light on his phone. They stayed silent. More footsteps. Whoever it was moved slowly, cautiously, as if they knew someone might be down there. Keanu quietly reached for a long wooden board lying on the ground. The trap door creaked again. Someone was opening it. Keanu moved fast. He jumped up the stairs and pushed the door open hard, catching the intruder by surprise. A man stumbled back, dropping a flashlight. He wasn't dressed like a farmer. He wore a black jacket, black pants, and had a small earpiece. Thomas ran up behind Keanu. "Is he one of them?" The man turned to flee, but Keanu caught him by the arm and pinned him against the wall. "Who sent you?" Keanu demanded. "You don't know what you're involved in," the man hissed. "Walk away while you still can." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "Not until we know the truth," the man smirked. "Then you better protect the old woman, because she's the last loose end." That was all Keanu needed to hear. He let go of the man, and in one smooth motion, knocked him out cold. They called the police, who arrived within minutes. The man had no ID, no phone, and refused to speak after waking up. He was taken in for questioning. Keanu and Thomas returned to the hospital immediately. Eliza was still sleeping peacefully. Keanu sat beside her, holding her hand. He looked at Thomas. "They're still watching, even now." Thomas nodded. "But now we know what's in that case. We know what they're after." Keanu looked at the window. "Then we have to make a choice. Destroy it or expose it." Eliza stirred in her sleep. She whispered something. Keanu leaned close to hear. "Save Daniel." He looked at Thomas. The answer was clear. The final gift the next morning came with rain, soft and steady. The kind of rain that made the world quieter, like it was listening. Inside the hospital room, Keanu sat by Eliza's bed, her hand resting gently in his. She had aged more in the past few days than anyone expected, and her body now moved slower, her breath more shallow. But her eyes were still bright. Thomas sat on the other side of the bed, clutching the small black case they had recovered from the cellar. It was now sealed in a protective box, untouched since the night before. "You don't have to do this," Keanu said softly. Eliza turned her head toward them. "Yes, he does," she whispered. "He needs to know where he came from, and the world needs to know what they tried to hide." Thomas swallowed hard. "I'm scared, Eliza." "So was I," she replied, smiling weakly. "When I first held you in my arms, when I lied to the police, when I kissed you goodnight and prayed they wouldn't come. Fear means you care." Keanu looked between them. "What if this research, this Project Echo, is dangerous?" Eliza sighed. "Then it must be faced, not buried. Truth is like a seed. You can try to hide it in the dark, but it will grow. It always grows." Later that day, Keanu made the call. A close friend of his, a journalist known for exposing corporate and political secrets, arrived that evening. She listened carefully as Thomas and Keanu told the full story. Everything from the accident to the secret cellar to the man in black. They gave her the letters, the photos, the vial, everything. "Are you sure?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "This isn't just about me anymore." The story broke 2 weeks later. Headlines across the world screamed about a hidden experiment from the 1970s involving memory storage, child subjects, and an attempt to erase all evidence of a family's work. Whistleblowers came forward. Old government documents were unsealed. Everything started to unravel, and in the center of it all was one name, Eliza Rutherford, the woman who had risked everything for a child who wasn't hers, the woman who waited 50 years for truth to come back to her doorstep. She didn't live to see the story reach the top of the news cycle. 2 days before the press conference, Eliza passed away peacefully in her sleep. She had held Thomas's hand, whispered Moonbeam one last time, and let go. The funeral was small, quiet, respectful. Keanu stood beside Thomas as they laid her to rest on a hill overlooking the orchard where he had first heard her scream. No bees, just wildflowers now, and silence. Months passed. The Project Echo files led to arrests, investigations, and new laws. The case reopened questions about ethics in research and child protection across multiple countries. But for Thomas, the biggest change was personal. He quit Hollywood, moved into the cottage, planted new trees in the orchard. He started a foundation, in Eliza's name, focused on giving homes to children in the foster system who'd been forgotten. He called it Moonbeam House. Keanu visited often. Sometimes he'd help fix a fence. Other times he'd sit on the porch with Thomas, both of them watching the sky turn orange in the evening. They didn't always speak. They didn't have to. Once, a little girl from the home ran up and hugged Keanu's leg. "You're the man from the story," she said with a grin, "the one who saved Grandma Eliza." Keanu bent down, smiling gently. "She saved me first." 1 year later, a plaque was added to the gate outside Moonbeam House. It read, "In honor of Eliza Rutherford, who believed every child deserved a safe place, a second chance, and someone to fight for them. Rescuer of one. Protector of many." Sometimes life changes in the blink of an eye. Sometimes all it takes is a scream in the orchard, and a man who chooses to run toward it. The leaked footage, the articles, the hacked hospital records, all of it had made the public question everything. But the system was still trying to protect itself. Inside, Judge Calder stood at the bench. His robe looked worn, his voice thin but steady. Court is now in session. Keanu entered first, followed by Layla holding baby Hope. A murmur spread across the room. On the other side, the hospital's legal team sat in silence. Dr. Hess wasn't present, but her lawyer, a woman with a tight bun and a sharper tongue, stood ready to fight. "Your Honor," she began, "this entire hearing is based on conspiracy, media noise, and the unstable testimony of a grieving woman." "My child isn't dead," Layla said, standing. "She's alive. She's right here. They told me she died, but I heard her cry." The judge looked at the hospital's lawyer. "Your response?" "We have records stating the child was stillborn. If there was a mistake, it was unintentional." Keanu stepped forward. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit audio recordings, security footage, and a signed testimony from an anonymous hospital employee confirming the child was stolen and retagged." He placed a flash drive on the table. The judge nodded, accepted into evidence. But just as the clerk inserted the flash drive into the court computer, the screen flickered. Then it went dark. "What's happening?" the clerk asked. Nora jumped up from her seat. "They're jamming the court systems." Keanu turned to Layla. "Hold the baby, don't leave her." Outside, someone screamed. The doors burst open. Armed men in suits stormed the courtroom, flashing fake federal badges. "Everyone stay calm," one of them shouted. "We are taking custody of the child under emergency biohazard protocol." "What?" Layla screamed. "What does that even mean?" Keanu stepped in front of her. "You're not taking her." The lead agent sneered. "You don't have the authority to stop us," but Judge Calder slammed his gavel. "You're not real agents, and I still run this court." They ignored him. Keanu glanced at Nora. She gave him a sharp nod. They were ready. Nora pulled out a hidden device from her purse and activated it. Instantly, all court cameras began recording locally. Broadcasting live on a private streaming network, Nora had pre-routed to a journalist's platform. The whole world was now watching. Millions of viewers saw men in suits threatening a judge and a crying mother in a courtroom. The lead agent froze. Someone in his earpiece must have been screaming. "Fall back," he hissed. The men began to retreat, but Layla stood up, holding her baby high. "This is my child. Her name is Hope, and she is not for sale." The courtroom exploded with applause. Reporters outside got the footage within seconds. The headline was already writing itself. They said the baby died, but she lived, and the world just saw the truth. By nightfall, Dr. Hess's face was everywhere. The board of the hospital resigned in disgrace. A federal investigation opened into Mercy Hills and all linked facilities. Judge Calder reinstated emergency custody rights to Layla and officially recognized the fraud in her medical records. Keanu walked with Layla to the courthouse steps. She turned to him, smiling through tears. "You saved us." He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just listened." The crowd cheered for her, not for him, and that's how he liked it. Far away in a dark office tower, the tall man in the suit watched the footage from court. His jaw tightened. "We underestimated him," he muttered. Dr. Hess stood nearby, pale and shaking. "What now?" she whispered. We go deeper underground, he said. But next time, we don't send warnings. And as the screen faded to black, a new file opened on his screen. Subject: Project Hope status. Incomplete directive. Recover at all costs. The final stand. The next morning brought silence. No bullets, no sirens, no chase. Just birdsong outside, the safe house window and the gentle cooing of baby Hope in her mother's arms. But Keanu Reeves didn't sleep. He stood alone outside the cabin, watching the woods with quiet eyes. Nora joined him, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "You should rest," she said softly. "They're not finished," Keanu replied. She nodded. "You're right." Despite the courtroom victory, he knew the fight wasn't over. Layla had won her child back in public, but behind the scenes, darker forces still moved in the shadows. The judge's ruling had ignited a wave of media outrage and public support, but it had also embarrassed powerful people who weren't used to losing. People who didn't forgive. People who would do anything to bury their secrets. In a facility far from the city, the tall man in the suit stood before a glowing monitor, a map lit up with blinking red dots, tracking locations, digital movements, and potential threats. Dr. Hess stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "The child was meant to be the proof," she said bitterly. "We were so close." The man's eyes didn't move from the screen. "We're not done. We're just evolving." He tapped the keyboard and opened a new protocol. Directive: Immediate elimination target, subject Hope secondary, Reeves, Keanu. "Status: engage dispatch the unit," he said coldly. Back at the cabin, Layla sat on the floor with baby Hope, gently rolling a small wooden ball across a blanket. The baby giggled. It was the sound of life, of healing, of innocence untouched by the chaos of the world. Keanu watched from a distance, his heart heavier than ever. He had fought battles before, against studios, lies, broken systems, but never for something like this. Never for someone so small, so pure. Nora entered with her laptop. "We've got a problem," she said. Keanu leaned in. An encrypted signal just activated near the cabin. Military grade. "I've never seen this frequency." He didn't speak. He just stood and went to, "Layla, we have to leave. Now." They packed within 5 minutes. Keanu carried Hope, wrapped in blankets. Layla followed closely, heart racing. Nora drove this time, taking a back road out of the forest. But 2 miles in, the trees shook. A blast exploded behind them. The road caved in. A black truck appeared in front of them, headlights blinding. "Ambush!" Nora shouted, spinning the wheel. They veered off-road, crashing through tall grass and sharp branches. Bullets ripped through the back window. Keanu shielded the baby, ducking low. Nora took a sharp left and found an old service tunnel, barely wide enough for the SUV. "Hold on," she yelled, gunning it forward. They disappeared into darkness. Inside the tunnel, the air was thick with dust and echoing noise. The car rattled over old rails, but they kept moving. Keanu spoke over the noise. "They want her gone, not stolen. Gone. They failed in public, so now they'll erase her the old way," Nora growled. Quietly, Keanu looked at Layla. "We're not going to let that happen." She nodded, gripping Hope tightly. They emerged from the tunnel into a wide, empty canyon. A helicopter appeared above. "They're everywhere," Layla whispered, shaking. "Then we take them somewhere they can't reach," Keanu said. He pulled out a folded map. It was old, faded, handwritten marks covered its corners. Nora looked over. "You're serious?" He nodded. "What is that place?" Layla asked. "Somewhere they forgot existed," Keanu said. "We go now." 3 hours later, after abandoned roads and hidden trails, they arrived at a mountain chapel hidden deep in the forest. It was built long ago by monks. No power, no signal, no digital presence. An old friend of Keanu's named Brother Silas greeted them with open arms. He didn't ask questions, just welcomed them inside. The chapel had thick walls, underground rooms, and a bell that hadn't rung in years. They made camp in the cellar, lighting candles, whispering prayers. For one night, they were safe. But that night, Layla couldn't sleep. She sat near the window staring at the moon, rocking Hope in her arms. "Why us?" she whispered. "Why my baby?" Keanu sat beside her. "Because she's light in a world full of darkness," he said. "And some people fear the light." The next morning, Brother Silas handed Keanu an old shortwave radio. "There's a message playing on all channels," he said. "Thought you'd want to hear it." Keanu turned the knob and listened. A calm female voice echoed through the static. "This is Dr. Marlene Hess. I'm issuing a public apology. I acted under pressure. The program has been shut down. The child is safe. I urge anyone with information to speak out." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "She's lying," Nora agreed. "It's bait. She's trying to flush us out." Keanu stood. "Then let's end it. On our terms." They contacted Judge Calder one last time. He agreed to meet them at a secure government site in the mountains, one with direct press access and full live stream protection. It would be their final move. A public declaration of the truth, with all eyes watching. They drove under heavy escort protected by honest agents the judge trusted. Dr. Hess was arrested during a press interview the same day. Her files were leaked. The truth came pouring out. Hundreds of babies, dozens of hospitals, fake deaths, erased records, sold children. The nation stood still. People wept. Layla took the stand beside her daughter. "They tried to steal my baby," she said. "But they didn't count on love. They didn't count on a man who didn't walk away." Cameras turned to Keanu. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The world already knew. Months later, Layla and Hope moved to a new home with security and peace. Hope grew strong, happy, and free. Keanu visited often, but quietly, no cameras, no noise. Just a quiet knock and a warm smile. One evening as he was leaving, Layla hugged him tight. "You didn't have to stay." "But you did." He looked down at Hope, now laughing in a tiny jumper. "Sometimes staying is the only thing that matters." As he walked away, the sun dipped behind the hills, and the world felt just a little safer, because someone had cared enough to fight, and love, real love, had won.